Yeah, so yeah, I'm Chris, as it says from the Japan Times, senior news editor there. I'll kind of get into a little bit more about what it is I do at the JT and what the JT is in a moment. But just first off, wanted to say, thanks to you and the rest of the JSF team for inviting me to speak. Hope it's going to be of some help to you, and thank you everyone who's joining now and whoever watches back later on. Um, so yeah, I came up with a very creative title for this talk, Science Coverage in the JT, very much um, what it says on the tin. But yeah, we're just trying to kind of break down a little bit of what we look for and kind of different considerations, if you're trying to share different research or papers or, whatever it is that's coming out of your respective universities or institutions. So just to begin with, maybe give you people a little bit of background on the Japan Times, just in case people aren't too familiar with it, or just to refresh their memory. So it's been around for a while in one form or another, founded in 1897, and through the different acquisition and agglomeration of different papers, it ended up in the form it is that we know it today. So yes, it's been around for quite a while, and I will point you in there as this being the premier English newspaper in Japan. We've got a circulation of over 19,000, which apparently makes us the largest of any English newspaper in Japan. Obviously, at the newspaper, print still, a big thing for us, but naturally, kind of I'm going through that transition towards digital, just in terms of our kind of subscriber base. Obviously, been a big focus of us for a while, but it's a space that continues to evolve, and we kind of negotiate and manage that. Um, in addition to the kind of the written and the text that you would expect from us, we also have a podcast called Deep Dive, which you can find on, I think, basically any of the all the normal podcast platforms. And of course, we have our social media output as well, the kind of main ones there: Facebook, Instagram, X, formerly known as Twitter, and all the rest of it. And then just lastly, Japan Times, we also have some kind of spin-off divisions that are sort of focused on more on publishing and also education. So, I mean, just to go back to the readership quickly, I mean, obviously, especially on the digital side, there's a big international readership, other people based in Japan or outside who have an interest in Japan or perhaps Asian affairs more generally. But I think a not unsubstantial component of our readership is Japanese people who've used the Japan Times as a kind of tool to learn English. And they stick with the paper and so on. But also some of these kind of spin-off educational products that we have to sort of hit that sort of demographic, that market, that they're using articles and so on that we've produced for the Japan Times. So something that could be appear in the main paper. It may also go into one of these other products. The main one, it's called Alpha. So yeah, so that's just all I'll say on that for now. And so then just a bit about me. So I'm senior news editor at the Japan Times. I've been with the newspaper since 2018, not always in that role, but that's what I'm doing now. I bit over a decade of experience in media and journalism, mostly working in Japan, obviously, but also China, which is where I lived before I moved to Tokyo. And in terms of what I do, I mean, it's kind of all sorts of aspects of the newspaper's operations, kind of the sort of daily bits and pieces to kind of get it out the door, so to speak. But in terms of what I'm going to be talking about today, topic of this meeting, the main thing is really this Our Planet section, which we launched just a little bit over a year ago. And I'll explain more about more of that in a second. But, if anyone wants to stay in touch or you want to kind of drop me a line or run a idea or pitch past me, there's my email. So, by all means, feel free to contact me there. But yeah, Our Planet. So we launched this just a little bit over a year ago. It has a pretty wide remit, but the primary focus is on kind of climate change and the environment. To some extent, also just kind of sort of pure science stories as well. But within those things, yeah, it's a wide remit, and we kind of cover a lot of different things, and we really try and make a point of yeah, taking a very kind of wide view, or trying to incorporate lots of different things within those kind of big topics. So for example, some of the articles that we've had over the last year, we've looked at the kind of everything that goes into sort of cherry blossom projections, but also how that's being affected by climate change, rewilding that we've seen in Fukushima post the 311 disaster. I look at nuclear fusion and, where Japan kind of sits within that research and so on. PFAS, like chemicals, and the concern around them, heat waves, and how they're obviously getting worse because of climate change, and how that intersects with Japan's aging population, and the legal trade in orchids, and how that actually also kind of interacts with scientific research into those flowers. Such as the little sample, as I say, we try and cover a lot of like different things. But if you're interested in looking at those or any of the other stories that we've run of Our Planet, there's the link just there to it. And I gave my email just then, but if you kind of want to reach the Our Planet team as a whole, I run it with my colleague Joel Tanzi, although there are a few people who get this email. But yeah, you can hit up environment@japantimes.co.jp, and that will get through to us. So yeah, so yeah, so just to start, I'm sorry, I apologize if any of this is a bit too obvious, but I just wanted to make sure I was kind of covering everything. But yeah, I just want to begin with the kind of the basics of pitching to us, and what's the kind of thing that's going to get our attention, and also just to help us understand what it is that you're trying to tell us, what it is the research you're trying to convey. So, I mean, just yeah, very obvious one, but a strong, clear subject line is always going to be really helpful. Our inbox is, as I'm sure yours may well be too, are, perhaps a little bit of a mess, or there's all sorts of things that you're getting. We get a lot of pitches, often of very little relevance, but it's just more stuff to kind of clog up your inbox. So anything that helps kind of cut through and just makes your email stand out, is something that we should pay attention to, and that's obviously very good, very helpful. Yeah, in terms of the actual kind of pitch itself or the email itself, really kind of getting those key takeaways early on in the pitch, things that are going to perhaps help us really understand like the way that we could frame it. Particularly for instance with the kind of the headline and just that sort of high level kind of presentation of an article. Anything that can assist with that is a really big help. But then obviously kind of getting into the sort of a brief summary of the research or whatever it is that you're trying to share. Again, just trying to kind of keep that concise, and trying to avoid too much sort of jargon or specialist terms, because although obviously you have to kind of forgive a little bit of our ignorance, I suppose. Although myself and Joel and perhaps other editors at the Japan Times, we're working with kind of science, environment, climate change topics and so on a lot. We don't have the expertise that you necessarily do, or to say nothing of the actual researchers, the professors who are producing this work. So keeping it intelligible to us is obviously is really key. But yeah, I think then moving on to this third point here, I think it's just also thinking about that relevance to the general public. We obviously have to think about our readership and the way that we can make stories and make information relevant to them, engaging for them. So I think if you can try and sort of, convey why is it that this research, these findings are important. If there's a news peg that you could help us with, if you can tie it into something topical, something that's been in the news recently, then that's obviously a big help to us as well. And that's going to be able and help us to make an article that's going to be more engaging for our readership, or be able to kind of see a way in which that could happen. And then also doesn't necessarily have, I say talk about the timeliness, but I mean, obviously sometimes we do have these bigger themes. So just in terms of things that we kind of keep going back to with our planet, that would be kind of climate change, biodiversity, energy, and disaster resilience. Maybe some other ones as well, but I think those are kind of probably the big four. So if there's a way to, because sometimes, research can be quite, it's into a sort of very narrow aspect of a certain field. But if you can kind of help us draw these connections or kind of see where it fits within this bigger picture, then I think it's going to be much more likely to pique our interest. And as I say, kind of see a way that we can make this research, make this story connect with our readership. Um, and yeah, so this next point, examples of past non-academic publications by researchers are on the topic. Yeah, if you have this, then I think it's just a way it links into that point about accessibility, something that can help us understand, the topic, the research that you're trying to tell us about. As I say, some things, it is very kind of specialist or it's a little bit more niche. Perhaps it's not something that we're super familiar with. So if it just anything that can help us get up to speed, kind of get to know the topic a little bit more, that's going to be a big help to us. And yeah, then the next point I would just say images or graphs, these are like a really uh, integral thing. You know, Especially, I mean, print as well, obviously, but definitely online as well. The presentation of an article is going to be really key. Um, Especially if it's going to be an article that's longer, having lots of images just to kind of break up that text and make it a little bit more easier for a reader to navigate and manage. That's really important. And, sometimes we might have a story idea that comes to us or one that we've sort of hit upon ourselves. And from the kind of text side, it's really kind of compelling, it's really interesting. But then you hit this issue of, well, how do we actually illustrate this? And, sometimes that can be a real barrier to moving forward with an article or kind of moving forward at the scale that you might like to. And lastly, just any kind of making clear any embargoes or trying to, or having an embargo in the first place. Um, Japan Times, despite its status, is we have a kind of relatively small team, I would say, compared to some other newspapers. Um, so we're a little bit sort of busy because of that. But I think, just obviously you, everyone in the media industry is pretty busy to some extent. So just allowing us a little bit of time to get to grips with this story, actually put this issue, this research, to actually put together an article on it. Sometimes if we're just finding out about something when that's getting blasted out to the rest of the world, um, we might not be able to deal with it, handle it as timely as we would like. And, that can obviously then affect our kind of interest in covering it. If it, by the time we're going to get to it, it's going to be widely covered elsewhere. Perhaps it's like a little bit less appealing to us. So I think embargoes are kind of pretty key as well. So yeah, sorry if any of that was just super obvious, but I just wanted to kind of be quite comprehensive with it there. So moving on to the next thing is yeah, just a few kind of other considerations about how you can try and get a conversation going with us or other editors. Even if you don't necessarily have a piece of research that's kind of brand new that you're trying to get out there, um, you know, perhaps you can kind of previous research that maybe didn't quite get the attention that it needed or something like that. So one way would be to look at the kind of past articles that we have done or that a media organization has done and perhaps offering kind of different angles on that story or different ways of approaching that and linking that in with the work of your institution, the researchers there. Sometimes it's just, I guess, getting ahead of time. So even before there's something maybe kind of concrete to share, just sort of establishing that initial contact, having that initial conversation, and kind of giving us or editor a sense of, the sort of landscape, the research landscape at your institution, or the things that people are working on, and what might eventually lead to something a bit more kind of concrete down the line, and just having that link there. Um, I think it just is a nice way to go about things. And lastly, is just solutions. So um, I think solutions are becoming a bigger and bigger part of what kind of climate journalism, biodiversity related journalism is focused on. Obviously, a lot of people are still setting out, the problems that we face there, and just the kind of raw science behind these things. But certainly, I think generally there's a strong demand, on the part of readers to kind of say, okay, like we get there's a problem and that kind of thing, but what are we going to do about it? What can I do? Or, what could governments do? How can I sort of assess what my government is doing? That kind of thing. Um, so yeah, if there's any sort of research, any work that relates to solutions to combating these problems, then I think that's just really, yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of people wanting to engage with that. Um, because yeah, as I say, it's just such a naturally a kind of a big area of concern and so on. So yeah, that's that. Okay, and just wanted to sort of maybe bring that all together and just talk a little bit about one article and how that came together and sort of some of the thinking behind it. So the story was one that we put out this summer at the end of August. See the headline there on the right: Japan's scrap and rebuild culture faces an environmental reckoning. Um, yeah, so anyone who's lived in Japan or been to Japan, obviously, I think you appreciate how much construction goes on here, and just how new homes kind of tend to be. I think it's quite a sort of somewhat distinctive, perhaps, part of Japan. Or I mean, certainly when I was back home in the UK the other month, everything just looked so old to me. So it's a little bit different. But so the original kind of genesis for this article was just I happened to see a short, not very long, NHK piece. This was on uh, the NHK Japanese website. I don't know if they ever did anything on in English. If they did, I never saw that. But I saw this NHK article about some University of Tokyo research, kind of looking at the emissions reductions that can come from renovating homes rather than just knocking down what was there and rebuilding them, which is pretty much the standard practice in Japan. So I mean it stood out to me, I think, because yeah, to say it's this an aspect of Japan that I think you don't uh, see elsewhere, and I think it's interesting to kind of scrutinize that. But then also separately, construction and kind of related industries have a really big emissions footprint. Kind of specifically, I'm thinking of like concrete. I don't have the overall number off the top of my head, but I mean it's a pretty substantial percentage of global emissions, concrete. So it's a way to kind of get in also into that sort of issue. I think if you were just trying to do a story about concrete emissions, concrete perhaps not the most exciting topic to a lot of readers, but I think with this sort of lens, with something that they can relate to and that they've seen, then it's a way to kind of engage them on that issue in a way that might be quite difficult otherwise. And then also as it ties into this solutions thing that I was talking about earlier. So the way that the article kind of ultimately came together is it was sort of the first part of it is based around that sort of University of Tokyo research and the extent of Japan's kind of scrap and rebuild culture, and then the fact that there is this all these emissions kind of tied to that. But then as the article kind of goes on, it tries to get into some of the solutions to that. So obviously, rather than knocking a building down, like all the efforts that could be made to renovate it, and how some construction companies in Japan are trying to take that approach now and try and adopt a new sort of practice or kind of integrate that into their business. But then beyond that, also companies that are looking to produce more sustainable, more environmentally friendly materials. As I say, concrete has a really big footprint. So trying to move away from that. And for example, looking at this building in Yokohama, which opened earlier this year, which I think is basically entirely made of wood. And it's kind of the first building, certainly in Japan. Um, I want to say the world, maybe not, don't quote me on that, but certainly in Japan, first kind of building to be built in that way. So kind of getting into those solutions again, sort of one thing for the reader to know, having that initial bit of University of Tokyo research, okay, well, this is a problem and it's quantified in a way that we didn't understand before. But then kind of what's the next thing? Okay, well, what do we do? And how can I respond to that? How can society respond to that? How can, the government respond to it? Um, and yeah, and just sort of final point, I think kind of reiterating just for us, although we have, world news, we'll run stories on, US politics, British politics, whatever it is. Obviously our real strong point, our real forte, what a lot of people are going to come to us for is for Japan related news, Japan related stories, and perhaps to a lesser extent, Asia related stories. But so it has, as I say, this kind of strong Japan angle to it as well. So if there's something very Japan specific to the research you're sharing, then at least from our perspective, then that could be a particularly interesting aspect of it. Okay. And lastly, just a few other kind of things that you could pitch. I've kind of been talking mostly in the idea that it's going to be some sort of research or a new paper, something along those lines, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So if one of your researchers is publishing a book, then that is something to pitch to us. Either that could just be a straight review, but there might be uh, scope for perhaps a Q&A around that book and the associated research. There's a few kind of different things that you could do there, but yeah, book publications would be one. Commentaries, op-eds, I think is another kind of good area. For our planet, we have actually done, I think, two or three commentaries from researchers so far. Um, just one example off the top of my head was a small team of researchers based in Scotland, Kyushu, and I want to say America. About this idea of a just transition in terms of climate change. Um, you know, Shifting towards kind of net zero in a way that doesn't disadvantage or make things worse for kind of people who are in those sort of emissions intensive industries. So commentary piece based on the research that they had done about that just transition issue in Japan and how that was sort of playing out and to what extent it was being recognized and acted upon. Um, so that was an interesting piece. I think we as our planet will probably do less kind of commentaries and op-eds now just because we have a new opinion editor who Mara Budgeon is her name, and if anyone wants her email, I can share that with you. But she has a kind of a strong kind of climate and environment background, so she's pretty engaged with those topics and has already commissioned a number of pieces on that. So I think we would sort of defer that to her. But yeah, certainly it's something we would like to see in the paper. Um, and yeah, I think just any kind of there's a lot of scope there in terms of scientists, researchers being able to add more context, kind of more information to topical issues kind of through that medium. And then lastly, this kind of goes back to what I said earlier, but strong images. Um, so perhaps something that would just really lend itself to social media. We can have a nice post on Instagram, and then that's like a strong visual hook into the research. or even just running kind of photo galleries, perhaps even photo essays in the paper and online. That would be another option as well. So yeah, just a few other kind of things that you could consider or different ways to pitch to us about the work that your institution is doing. So that's everything from me. I hope that wasn't too short or too long, Ewan, and I hope it was interesting. But yeah,
Thank you.
thank you for listening.